with it.
Hello, SpyCon members. We are here with two wonderful effects giants. We've got Steve Begg, we've got Chris Trice, and we are going to be talking about Casino Royale and the visual effects from that film, which are quite remarkable. Many of them quite unknown, and people are unaware of them. So we want to get into that. This is being done as a fundraiser for the Motion Picture and Television Fund. I personally have a soft spot in my heart because Julius Harris, who was played Tiki in Live and Let Die, spent his final years there. They gave him community, dignity, and did so much to make his life a better life after he had heart surgery. And I've always been moved by their work. So I hope you'll take a little moment to go to the homepage, make a little contribution to the fundraiser that we're doing on that end. And without further ado, let's talk about Casino Royale, the first Bond novel, the only Bond film that is an origin story for 007. It came after a huge success of Die Another Day, but a film that was not lauded for some of its digital effects in there. There was some criticism that Bond had gone too digital, and of course Bond was entering a digital age, filmmaking was entering a digital age, and the burden fell upon Steve Begg to turn Bond into something that felt real, but felt as modern, as complete as possible. Steve, talk about how you got the gig.
I got the gig, I guess, through my work on Batman Begins. I was lucky to work with Chris Kobold, who was the kind of regular special effects, practical effects guy that was doing the Bonds at the time. And Chris and I had also done the two Lara Croft films as well, so he knew me quite well. And then, you know, once he witnessed the fact that I knew a fair amount about filming miniatures and stuff, he helped put my name forward for Casino Royale. And, you know, they desperately wanted to go back to the, you know, using the practical effects and stuff augmented with CGI rather than letting the CGI take over. So I had that kind of background. So which I'm very grateful for, they opened the door and took me seriously, and that was my first Bond gig, and I had fun.
Sounds great. And Chris, can you talk about how you got involved in this? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't understand the level of miniature work that's done in a film like Casino Royale. Can you talk about how you came into the fold?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I came on board through a chap called Bill Pearson, who a long-time model maker who sadly died a few months ago. And he was a friend of Steve's, and Steve got Bill involved in the film, and then Bill, as the model supervisor, brought a crew in. And I'd worked with Bill a lot in the last 15, 20 years, and I basically came on board through that. And because I was one of the most senior people there, I sort of covered for Bill when Bill wasn't there. So that's how I got involved with the movie.
Sounds great. And both of you were working with Chris Kobold, who's, you know, a legend in practical effects, but also somebody who has a tremendous amount of background in working in model work on that end, which the Bond films have always been kind of big on models and miniatures because they blow so much stuff up that you really can't afford to blow up in real life on that end. Can I just get a brief sort of summation from both of you guys? You know, certainly the miniatures that were done by even back with John Steers, but certainly with Derek Meddings and John Richardson and the work that they would do. Did that have an influence on you? Did you go back and look at that, or did you say we're taking in a full new approach?
I was lucky in that I worked with Derek as well on the Tim Burton Batman, so I knew him fairly well on that. But, you know, going further back in time, yeah, I was inspired by his work with on the Jerry Anderson TV shows, Thunderbirds obviously being the most famous. And, you know, I just thought when I saw that stuff, I thought, I want to do that. And, I think as I got older, Derek had progressed onto the Bonds and stuff. And I just felt, you know, that you could see a certain amount of magic in the miniature mayhem that he brought that wasn't quite as evident beforehand. I'm not saying there was anything wrong with John Steer's miniatures or anything like that. They're all just relatively low key, whereas Derek's stuff was kind of like showbiz stuff. And I remember in particular the poppy field blowing up in Live and Let Die was just awesome. And even then, I knew it was a miniature, but it was way more spectacular than a lot of the stuff I'd seen previously in the Bonds. And when I got an opportunity later on to join them, I did throw a homage or two into my work on the Bonds, acknowledging Derek Meddings.
Well, there was certainly in the airline hangar, if you look very closely. Can you talk about that? I think we've got an image for it.
Well, Chris with Bill Pearson and co. Built this very impressive hangar, and I just thought, because I felt we were following in the same sort of footsteps as Derek, I thought it'd be really nice to get the first of a few nods to Derek in there. And one of the things we did was we put a graphic on an overhead raised platform with the Meddings Co. or whatever it was on it. I mean, it's kind of hard to notice, but it's on the first shot where you see the jet exiting the hangar from the inside. If you look on the camera right, you actually see a guy standing on a platform, and underneath him you see Meddings, which I thought was a nice little nod to him.
Yeah, I think it meant a lot to people who certainly who knew of Meddings' work. I was fortunate to meet him on the set of GoldenEye and had a wonderful conversation with him, and got to watch him blow up a miniature set of the Silvernaya radar station. It was a great experience to be present while he was working and seeing how hard and meticulous he was with that, and without the ability to enhance with digital, which is one of the things that you've been doing that. I want to go into Casino Royale, and I really want to start with the free running sequence in Casino Royale. That sequence wasn't shot in Madagascar, it was shot down in the Bahamas. And you guys made a choice that's very different from, say, like what Hitchcock did in North by Northwest, where he never had the actors at Mount Rushmore for the chase scene that happens on the face there of that. And a very different sort of approach than, say, the Bond filmmakers did when they did Moonraker with the gondola sequence, where they would shoot the stuntmen in wide shot. They shot the plates for projection. And then, of course, money runs out, time gets tight, and they don't have time to do the projection right with having the talent on top of the mock-up of the gondola. And it hurt that sequence, which is, got some great stunt work. Tell me about the choice to make sure you were going to shoot all of your material in the on location there.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things we had backing us in a big way was Martin Campbell. He'd previously done a film where the plate unit, the people that had to capture all the backgrounds and stuff for all the visual effects shots, were basically not respected and basically rushed, so that the stuff that they shot was pretty inadequate, what have you. On this particular film, he actually gently harassed the film units I was with to make sure that I got what I wanted sort of plate-wise. And I think it shows, I think a lot of the stuff is relatively seamless in there. But the first thing that happened once we shot that particular action sequence in the Bahamas, when I met up with him afterwards in Prague, was he said, Begg, want to talk to you. He's quite militaristic in a way. He used to speak to people. And we shut the doors on this set, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get I knew, you know what, ripped out of me. And he said, did you get the plates? And I went, yes, I did. He went, are you sure? And I went, yeah, no. He said, don't let me down. If you haven't got them, you should let me know. Anyway, cut a long story short, I got, for a combination of shooting movie plates and stills and all sorts of stuff, I got the stuff which I think is fairly seamlessly integrated into the opening chase sequence, which I have to be honest though, you know, like 80% of that is real. But what is nice is there are the visual effects shots don't jar enough to take you out of the film, the sequence, as a testament that we got what we wanted plate-wise. So we didn't screw up this time.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that sells it to me, that makes it so vital, is you know, you're watching, you know, you're clearly watching, you know, talent, and Sebastian, Foucault, the free runner. I mean, he is so brilliant, and to have someone who is, you know, just doing 90% of the stuff that you're seeing on screen that his character's doing.
One of the biggest problems we had with him, it seems like a living visual effect. He would clamber up these I-beams with no help whatsoever. He'd have a line on him purely for health and safety reasons and insurance and stuff. But that thing would constantly go slack because he would outrun the tension on the rope as he climbed up the girder or whatever. He was quite something. Well, and one other thing was, you could tell Daniel Craig thought, I've got to be just as cool as him, and in a kind of, I can't think of another word, an endearing kind of way, he'd give it his best shot to try and keep up with him, you know, and of course that's what I think won him over to a lot of people, because, you know, you could tell this guy was really trying to keep up with this unbelievably fit guy, and did.
Yeah, the thing though that sells that sequence so much for me is the confrontations on the crane arms, and those confrontations, you know, you look at them, and in an older style film, the filmmaker would just put the crane arm near the ground and they would shoot a low angle, right? Yeah. And you know, you would see the actor up there on that, and there would be pads all around. And you guys were able to do that, but because you were able to digitally and do things like watch a gun fall out of somebody's hand and tumble into space, and you never think that gun has now become a digital element. That gun is now not. It's stopped at a green, you know, cloth down there. That was great. Can you talk about this work? Did you work with the storyboarders on that? How long was the pre-production? What's the process for creating, to making sure you're going to show what needs to be shown?
I can't remember specifically the amount of time, but from memory, it was kind of like, you know, somewhere between 8 weeks or whatever, 12 weeks build up to the actual shoot. But one of the things I did have was a little bit of a rapport with Peter Lamont, the production designer. And for the stuff where they're standing on top of these cranes, there was talk about doing it back in Pinewood, you know, I guess real skies and stuff like that. And I immediately thought, that's just going to look like Pinewood. And I said, well, why don't you put 30 foot of the crane extensions that you have there on top of the abandoned hotel that we're shooting around? We'll shoot against real sky, and we'll do digital extensions on that. And which they all went for. And, you know, I had a look at that stuff recently, and you just buy it. It's got that Bahamian light that you won't get in Pinewood Studios, which 9 times out of 10 is bloody rain or grey or whatever. And I think that's part of many little tricks that help to make that sequence work.
Yeah, the quality of the light, the just complete matching that you're seeing there is so great. And one of the things you talked about, Derek Meddings, is that the miniature super tanker that he did was shot from the top of that same hotel in the Bahamas, the shots in the water. Where they used that, and that hotel was an extension of when you see the Coral Harbor Hotel in Thunderball. So it's like it kept showing up and stuff like that. Maybe a future film will go back there yet again to see what happens.
Yeah.
So let's leap forward into the Miami airport tanker truck chase, fight, whatever we want to call it, which is this sort of magnificent mid-film set piece that's in there. And the first thing I want to do is talk to you about, like, this is something that I think, knowing that you can, it's a Bond film, you can get a 740 freaking 7, and you know, certainly Peter Lamont can dress a 747 so it looks like maybe it's a new plane or something like that or whatever, and you can shoot on tarmac with stunt drivers for weeks if you need to on that. Certainly the second unit's been able to do that sort of stuff before. What was the discussion to say, no, this scene is going to integrate virtually every different type of effects known to man?
It started with, because they were doing a lot of that back then, with, look, we'll shoot at the airport in Prague, and we'll do the bulk of the work there, and then the rest of it, the stunt work will be done in England, but you can kind of blend the whole lot together, you know, using CGI, and which is true. But there was also a lot of room for other tricks as well, and that's where, again, I tried to, you know, shoehorn in model visual effects in there, which helped to bridge between the two locations. I mean, there was a lot of digital map paintings and things like that used as well to do, you know, set extensions of, is it Miami Daya? I forget the name, the Miami airport in the back, on the Prague and the London, Britain, the British locations, to meld the two together. But it truly was, you know, a hybrid of every trick in the book, really, in that one.
Yeah. So, Chris, can you talk about the extent of the model work? I think a lot of people who know film might say, well, that the big giant plane coming out of the hangar is probably a model because they've never seen one that quite looks like that. But there's so much else that is being done as model work in there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, that whole hangar sequence was actually quite sophisticated. It was originally intended that sequence was going to be shot as a foreground miniature in daylight, which is why the hangar model itself was made out of steel. Eventually, it was decided they were going to shoot it at night, and then they decided, well, if we're shooting it at night, there's no need to take it down to Dunsfold and shoot it. We can do it at the studio. So, in fact, the actual hangar itself is completely fabricated out of steel, like a full-size hangar, but miniaturized. There was a second model unit who were actually responsible for building the aircraft itself. Not many people appreciate that there's actually a second aircraft in that hangar under construction, which you barely see, which we managed to get our hands on. But we were basically responsible for doing all the dressing that was inside the hangar. So all the construction jigs, all the gantries, golf carts, all the little things that actually sell it as a real thing. We were responsible for doing that. One of the things that you do when you're doing miniatures is you don't just scale down the location or, you know, the place you're supposed to be. You have to scale down the lighting as well. So you end up with little pools of light running along one side of a wall or on the floor. One of the tricks that we do, and again, Steve can fill you in on this, is that we actually smoke the stage up very lightly with some smoke, so that the spotlights that are in the roof, which are just ordinary dichloric spotlights you might have in your house, you actually see a beam of light coming down from them, but it gives you a nice scale pools of light within the hangar. The whole thing was actually shot from about 17 different positions. Again, I think Steve can probably tell you that. And they chose 2 or 3 of the best angle of views to actually use in the film. And it was all shot motion control. There was basically a slot in the floor, and it was towed. It was towed via a motion control motor.
And so when you're shooting miniatures of like the plane, and you've got and you're matching in, for example, shooting extras that you're shooting onto a stage and everything like that, do you have to make all the mechanical adjustments for the lenses and stuff like that, the mathematical adjustments, so that because you know, you're shooting with miniatures, you're having to shoot with, you know, very low angles, very wide angles to give that sense of scale. How does that work when you're putting those extras in the background?
What we do is we make very careful notes, and we acquire all the data of where the camera is, the camera tilt, the camera height, pan, etc., and obviously the lens. For example, most of the model work we did on that particular film was shot on a 21mm, I seem to remember. And so when I got around to shooting the extras against green screen to put into the shot, we mimicked we copied the tilt, and then because I think it was 12 scale, we did, help me out here, Chris, it was 12 times higher than it was on the model, with the same tilt, yes, what have you, so that in theory they'd all kind of line up when we added those particular elements on top of each other. Nonetheless, there's still quite a bit of massaging involved. Even when you get everything right, as far as the book's concerned, you still have to do a certain amount of fooling around with the stuff afterwards. But I think on the whole, the stuff looked pretty good. There was at no point again where you did it jar. You're in a different world, So, and as Chris said earlier, one of the things that we were very careful to do was match the lighting that they'd done initially at Prague airport, and we had the same sort of color temperatures, and none of the lights were up in the air. They're all at ground level, which is always a giveaway with miniatures. There's always this amazing light coming from incredibly high up in a way you wouldn't be able to do if it was real. So we kept everything at ground level, and I think all of that, combined, made you feel you were in the same environment, albeit you're in theory 3 locations. You're in Prague, you're in Dunsfold, which was this old aerodrome outside London, and you were on a model stage as well. So
Yeah. And technically on another stage to shoot the extras.
Absolutely. Again at Pinewood. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And the extras, were you shooting those guys against color matching, sort of concrete or whatever? Were you shooting them against a green screen so you had?
No, we put them against green basically, but we tried to light them in exactly the same way they would have been lit had they been in that miniature environment, had it been full scale. So in order to meld the whole thing together.
Yeah, and was there talk of basically not doing a miniature plane, just taking, because y'all had a 747 out there at Prague, right? I mean, it's y'all had, I don't know if it was a working one or completely stripped or whatever, but y'all had one that you could have towed around and done shots with all the extras you wanted. But what was the reason you guys wanted to work with a miniature? You weren't blowing it up. I mean, so.
No, it was basically a decommissioned 747 with its engines removed, I think. And then a set of dummy engines that looked like B-52, the twin pods attached to the wings. And then they wanted to add an additional bump or something on the back, from what I remember. And so again, it was a hybrid of tricks. So every time they used the real 747 for any stuff where Daniel Craig and team are close to it, that would be a CG enhancement on top of it. And any wider shots, that would be the miniature, the 12th scale miniature with CG people added in. As I say, the whole thing was a massive sandwich of all sorts of tricks.
It also looks like that y'all might have been waiting on final design cues as far as like what the logos were going to be for this fake airline manufacturer. Were those put onto the miniature plane live, or were those digitally put on?
Chris will remember that one.
Well, the actual miniature itself had the logos painted onto it. The idea is, of course, it's supposed to be a prototype airliner, so we couldn't have a bog standard Boeing 747 because everyone would see it was a Boeing 747. So as Steve mentioned, the upper deck was longer, the engines were changed, the 747 we actually used was down at Dunsfold. And in fact, if you ever watch the Top Gear TV series, you sometimes see it in the background when they're going around the racetrack. And in fact, I think the engines are still on it. So it was a 747 that had no engines on it at all originally, and we had to convert the full size one to make it look like a prototype airliner. So as Steve says, whenever you see the close-up live action around the undercarriage, where you don't see the rest of the plane, there was no need really to do any work to it. Whenever you saw the aircraft in long shot, it was generally our model, although occasionally it was a digitally altered image of the full-size aircraft. But the logos generally, certainly on the models, were finished. It was a finished item. There was no digital work needed to it other than to enhance the finished shots with little tweaks.
Yeah, there's some great shots of the model aircraft without the logos on it. And I just didn't know if, I couldn't tell whether they'd been digitally stripped on or whether they'd been painted on by Peter Lamont's team. So there were also a lot of other models that appear in that sequence aside from the hangar and the plane itself. And some of those, I think, are ones that most viewers would have no clue anybody would have built, in essence, a miniature of, i.e. the vehicles in the chase. Can you talk about why you built those?
Is that for me, that one?
Either one.
Either one. What we had to do is we had to make the place look like it was a busy, international airport. And therefore we had to have a lot of activity in the sky, distant aircraft taxiing, coming into land, taking off, all that kind of stuff. So right at the last minute, they decided to send me and a camera crew down to Heathrow Airport. And this is the end of the main unit shoot, the main shoot. So they sent me down to Heathrow Airport, and they put me, on the runways at night with I can't remember the name of the Genesis digital camera. And we hoped to capture all this footage of things taxiing and coming into land and all sorts of stuff. And we found out when, at that time, the cameras were not sensitive enough to capture anything usable. So we ended up with a load of rubbish, absolute rubbish. So cut to a month or two later, we're doing a model shoot. So I said to Chris and a couple of other guys, I said, any chance of getting these little tiny, commercially available kits of model aircraft that we can, put together and stick some super bright LEDs on, and then I'll shoot them against black, and we'll put them in the background, to make it look like there's other activity within the airport, which they did very successfully. So we shot all that stuff. I didn't tell Martin Campbell about it. And when he started to see the shots coming together, and he said, wow, that stuff from Heathrow certainly blends in, doesn't it? And I said, it's not Heathrow. It's tiny little model kits from Woolworths. I don't know if you got the Woolworths in America. Yeah. A really cheap flying around in the background there in the back. And he did a YTF moment. And he went, well, it doesn't matter. It looks good to me. And and that was that. And I felt that was a successful little trick that we pulled off there. Yeah, we go from super expensive action and visual effects to cheap and cheerful stuff from local toy shop.
Yeah,
in a Bond movie.
Yeah. I was going to say one of the aircraft we used was actually a travel agent's model of a 747. So it was essentially ready made, but of course we then had to dirty it down and make it look like a real 747. Again, with the LEDs on the side of it, and very carefully hiding the wires along the leading edge of the wing so that they weren't obvious to power the LEDs. So that was very much sort of making stuff at the last minute. In fact, Steve said to me when he first came up with this idea, he said, I've got an idea. And when Steve says, I've got an idea, you're going, uh-oh. And he was the one that came up with the idea of the plastic kit. And I literally left the moment he mentioned it, raced down to a local model supplier, picked up a couple of kits, went home with them, built them overnight, and then brought them in the following morning, and they went straight in front of the camera, at which stage he said, I want another one. So I instantly left the sound stage, went down to the same model shop, bought another model kit, built it overnight, took it back in the following morning. So yeah, it got a bit sort of hairy at stages, but the results were good. We're pleased with the results.
One of the best shots, for me anyway, using these models is the shot that, using the model Chris mentioned of the Virgin 747, which I believe came from the desk of one of the chairmen of Virgin Atlantic at the time. From what I remember, it's about that big, and it's a shot where you see Bond's just rolled off the tanker, so comes running towards camera, and you see this 747 come landing in the background there, and then there's a 3/4 shot of him running towards the camera, and it's going away in the background there. And I think it's some of the best miniature work in the movie, but nobody notices it.
Well, but the thing it does is it completely sells a moment. And you know, it would not have been very long ago that you would have had a wonderful shot of Daniel Craig, you know, running passionately down the tarmac, and that would have been it. And you know, maybe somebody would have strung some Christmas lights out of focus in the background there, and you'd have had some sound effects of jets going around. But nobody would have thought like how much more this sells, like the immediacy and danger, to feel the weight of what is actually a fairly small and lightweight model rumbling down, you know, on there, in the sense of like impending doom and what's at risk if, you know, this terrorist attack happens and stuff. So no, kudos to those kinds of choices that were made there. So on that, I want to jump to two things before we get to the grand finale here, but I want to jump to effects that nobody is ever supposed to notice under any circumstance whatsoever. And the first one is a scene where Martin Campbell decided he wanted to make sure that nobody could cut away from a particular shot. That's for air in the shower there. And Bond is comforting her after she's witnessed this brutal fight to the death in the stairwell. And he starts kissing her fingers. And everybody loved it, but they said, you know, is a little too much finger kissing here. It's beginning to look a little more fetishistic than comforting at this point. And I can't imagine a bigger challenge than that. Can you explain the shot and what happens?
Absolutely. He when they had the shot, which involves Bond kissing all 5 of Vesper's fingers, trying to comfort her, as the camera slowly trucks in to the 2 of them in the shower, and in front of them is this glass with water running down it as well.
And reflections on the surface of it.
Exactly, right? So there's all that going on. He's got her hand, and he's slowly kissing each finger. Martin said 1 or 2 is comforting and slightly, you know, romantic. He said 5 is disgusting. So he said, is there any way you can go down to 1, 2, and then the last thing, like one last finger, you know, but the camera nothing changes about the shot. So it was an utter nightmare, and total kudos to the digital people who basically did I think about 12 weeks of pasting and cutting and warping. There was loads of morphing in there as well, to go from, you know, a 5-finger kiss to a 3-finger kiss. And it's one of those things, though, if you look at it now with that knowledge, you'll see it. But nobody noticed it at the time.
I've never noticed it. I had Martin tell me that before the film came out, and I've watched it carefully every time, and my brain cannot process it that well. So You've got better eyes than I, my friend. So.
He said, I think that's the best. He said the visual effects are all pretty good in this film. That's the best visual effect in the entire movie. And
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that was compliment or not, but
well, but it's staggering because of the level of, you're watching those performances.
Yeah.
You see, the wonderful film, but the end of Rogue One, the uncanny valley that you see with Carrie Fisher's Princess Leia character in there, and you're just going like it's almost there. And with this, there's nothing in that, and it's like nobody shot that with the idea of like, oh, we need the camera information, we need motion control, we're going to try this at different timings and paces, and it's like, no, you just had the take and that's it. And the other one is, as I understand, there were some issues that had to do with the way that the collar on the back of Daniel Craig's shirt, it needed to fit like a well-tailored shirt, and there were times where, for whatever reason, it would stay back and everything.
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a few issues. He was brand new. He was sort of going off diametrically in a different direction as far as the classic James Bond looked. They wanted him to look cool, one way or another. They wanted him to look cool. So sometimes there'd be issues with the costume, being a bit too loose and very un-James Bond-like, and then when they prefer it more like that. So we did a lot of that. And I think there was issues with the collars, the cuffs as well, where one was too short, one was too long. We kind of had to jiggle all that kind of stuff. But I mean, there's lots of glamorous stuff in visual effects work. They're all part of my reel now. If you want to see them.
Well, but that's
through the explosions.
But the thing that's wonderful with that is it's the attention to the character detail. And that's the thing to me, is that sometimes, like the best work by MI6, the best work by a visual effects artist should be something you never would notice. In the Avengers films or something, it's like, well, they've rebuilt the New York skyline and they've got this, and you just sort of accept there's a certain animation-esque quality looking at. When you're seeing James Bond walk into a casino, you're not expecting there to be one digital adjustment at all, maybe a little color correction or something, but nothing else, and that's the stuff that I find really impressive on that end. I want to go back to one other thing from the airport chase, which I meant to ask about, and you may have had nothing to do with that, but I know that a lot of fans noticed that in the trailer for the airport chase, there were human beings in the Bindi bus that gets flashed through. Can you talk about that?
Basically they had an awesome 3-cut sequence where the truck piles through the Bindi bus, airport bus that's used to take people from the building to the outer reaches where some of the aircraft are, and they wanted a shot of the truck piling through that. And what they had was they did it pretty much for reals. They had a camera inside the actual bus, and they had stuntmen near the camera, and then beyond that, at the actual impact point where the truck went through, they had dummies. And the thing was so visceral and successful because everything lurches and it's utter mayhem that the censor saw it and went, no way, that's just loads of people being killed indiscriminately by Bond, even though it's not driven by Bond, and that didn't go down too well, but it was a hell of a shot. Everything went like that, and because there was loads of life in the foreground, courtesy stunt people, the dummies at the back, because of the impact, were animated as well, and it was quite a shocking shot. But unfortunately, funnily enough, I think nowadays they put it in. But
I don't think it was actually the censors. I believe it was Michael Wilson, who was constantly, sort of said, if you remember in GoldenEye, there's a scene where the tank runs over a little car and going around the streets of St. Petersburg, and they shot it, And Michael came back to him and he said, okay, you got to shoot the shot of the guys getting out of the car, which gets a huge laugh at the audience. But he says, we're not going to do the indiscriminate death in here. And I think that's something, a precept that he brings, that sometimes people like try to see if they can get away with a little more mayhem.
Can I just tell you a quick anecdote?
Yeah.
That's connected to this. I think you're right. I think I've got that. I may have that wrong. It may well be Michael Wilson. There is quite a brutal fight on a staircase at one point where Bond's taken out two heavies and they're rolling down a staircase and it's real dirty. There's no classic, it's everything's used to smash it up and it's very, very violent. And the censor came to see it. And at that particular point, all the sound effects were all turned up, you know, maximum volume for all the punches and the cracks and the everything. And then Stuart Baird, the editor, told me after doing a little bit of a recut on it, he said, what we've really done is we've just turned down the sound effects of the, you know, the arms breaking and the legs breaking. He said it's the same fight. And he went in, because I was seeing him about something immediately afterwards, and he came back out and he'd done it. And it was just, all he did was he turned down the volume of the punch sound effects, and it got past the censor. Still is pretty brutal though.
Yeah. Let's go to the grand finale. And if you haven't seen Casino Royale, you're going to want to see it. There is an amazing fight in a collapsing building, which in its own way speaks to kind of like the horrors of everybody's nightmare of what happened on 9/11 with the World Trade Center, to be trapped in a building that's collapsing. And then you throw in the Bond element of he's fighting for his life and trying to save the Vesper at the same time. And this was done in Venice. And to give a little preface before this, Michael Wilson told me that he was at a dinner party and that a woman said she had seen Casino Royale. And he said, what did you think? She says, I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And he said, oh, well, it's been a very popular movie, particularly amongst women, the great romantic story in it. And he said, well, why? And he said, she said, I think it's just, it's so horrible for a film crew to go and destroy some historic building in it, like movie entertainment. And he looked at her, and Chris, I think this speaks to your incredible work as well. He said, there was no building. That was all miniature. And it just, that's the kind of thing that to me is what makes these films fantastic when they really work. Can you talk about the concept and the challenges of building the Venice building for that sequence?
Well, I've got to be completely honest here. The Chris Kobold unit basically built a steel frame on hydraulics to actually raise it and lower it into the water tank at Pinewood. The chippies, the carpenters, then went in and basically clad the building in wood, and the plasterers then went in and textured it. We did all the dressing that goes on top of that. So we provided things like the canvas awnings and bedding that's hanging over the railings. And behind that particular building, there's supposed to be a building site. So we're making 1/3 scale wheelbarrows and cement mixers and things like that. And that particular sequence actually is quite interesting. And again, Steve can probably go into detail about that. They shot a background plate in Venice where there wasn't a building, which then they digitally composited the building that we built onto that background plate, so that you get a shot of all the tourists looking across the canal going, oh, what's happening over there? That building was actually built in 3 sections. Because the water tank at Pinewood is not deep enough to take the entire building, we would film the first third going in, and again, then we would film the second layer would be taken off, and then we'd film the last bit 17 or 18 times, and each time it had to be redressed because the roof tiles on the roof all fell off, which meant that there were some safety divers who were like a dog chasing a stick. You give them the word and they dive in, and they were going all these roof tiles for us. and it gave them something to do. Because one of the interesting things about that particular sequence, and this goes back to this thing we were talking about with lighting, was that the set was constructed in the water tank at a certain angle, so that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after lunch, when we were ready to shoot it, having prepped it during the morning, the sun would be in the same position relative to the model as it was to the live action plate that was shot in Venice, so that when you comp the two together, all the shadows matched. And again, if you didn't do that, the audience wouldn't necessarily know why it didn't look right, but they would know there was something not quite right about it. And so you have to do these subtle little things to make sure that the two composite together. And as you say, it's seamless. Any of those moments, we touched upon it a little bit earlier, any of those moments where if something is not quite there, it draws you out of the film just for a moment, but it takes you out of the story because you notice it. And again, a lot of the audience will say, I don't know why that doesn't look right, but it doesn't look right. So you have to be very careful to make sure that what you do fits the flavour of the movie. One of the things that's a constant frustration is that if model makers or special effects people do their job well, nobody notices it. We go unrecognised, but then that's what our job is supposed to be. So yeah, there's also an awful lot of stuff in Casino Royale that, as a professional who's used to seeing special effects and knowing how things are done, there's loads of things in that film passed me by. I didn't know they were digital or they'd been tweaked. So there's a certain satisfaction, I think, in producing something that, like a magic trick, like a magician, where you're persuading people that you're seeing something they're not really seeing. And while they're watching it, you can sit back with a smug look on your face, sort of almost kind of laughing at them and going, fooled you. And that's a lovely feeling, being able to do that.
Well, one of the things it's a huge challenge in shooting a miniature that's supposed to be a building collapsing into the water in Venice is that you're dealing with water, which is like the genuine, like, and you see lots of miniature ships in movies and stuff, and they do everything they can to froth. Can you talk about the challenges of miniatures with water?
Well, the problem with water, like fire, is that it doesn't scale. And one of the reasons that we built the building in Venice on such a large scale, which was third scale in actual fact, was to get as close to a realistic water effect as we could get. Again, I mean, that wasn't down to the model unit's choice, particularly. That was done in the pre-production phase. Again,
it's down to me.
Yeah, that was Steve keeping that. Yeah, I'll let Steve tell you about it.
Yeah, it's I've had experience with really large-scale miniatures in Batman Begins, and we had like a third-scale Batmobile tumbler, and the bad thing about things like that is they're bigger and they're more unwieldy and they're potentially dangerous, and you know, they're no longer a miniature. So you still have concerns about health and safety, for example, and stuff, but nonetheless, things like fire and water are just that little bit more realistic. So I'd elected to go third scale on the collapsing villa in the Grand Canal in Venice, as opposed to 12th scale for the aircraft that comes out the hangar, because we were shooting that under controlled conditions with a motion control rig, so I could do slow exposures, have the focus really sharp. There was no fire, there was no water or anything like that around that, so that was that. But for this, I knew we had to have all these elements involved. And so nonetheless, this building model miniature was put on this rig, and from what I remember, it was a ton and a half. What have you, and even at third scale, the water worked most of the time, but every now and again you get a splash that, because I was shooting in slight slow motion speeds, wouldn't look right. So later on, against the big blue screen that was attached to the tank, I got the special effects guys to drop like big heavy weights in, including a car engine at one point. So I get full scale splashes at 24 frames a second. We'd isolate them from the blue screen and put them on top of the model shots wherever the splashes looked odd or globuly, you know, where the scale's going wrong. I put those full scale splashes on top of that. So, you know, and of course, you know, it looked much more realistic. And as Chris said earlier, you know, we're very careful to shoot a certain, we had a small window of about 1 hour to shoot the stuff at Pinewood. I think it was about 2 months after we shot the background plates in the Grand Canal, to make sure that everything lined up. But with all these things, even with all those things going, you could still kind of tell there was a little bit of a model element there. So once again, there was this nice hybrid approach of it almost works, and we enhanced it with a little bit of CG post-production work, and it looked great. And that's why Michael Wilson got into trouble with those people at that party, because we'd obviously fooled them.
Yeah, yeah, which is the point. I mean, you know,
that's a compliment.
So was the dust? There's a great, you know, thing where when the building starts to shift, you see the dust of, like, you know, joints bursting and things like that happen when you collapse a building. Was that put in? Was that part of the miniature, or was it all digital?
No. All of that. It's still 80 to 90% real in camera. And there was a lot of breakaway elements, like there's a chimney stack next to the side of the building, and that all of that is kind of pre-broken, reassembled and attached with little pins and things in it to hold it next to the main structure of the villa. And then these pins are released, so the whole thing collapses with lots of fuller's earth and dust on it to you know, give it scale. But no, the bulk of the destruction's real. It's just every now and again we just sweeten it with a little bit of a full scale element. There's also some pigeons taken off at one point flying through a shot that were added in afterwards as well.
Is there with doing the shooting, you talked about overcranking, shooting it so it was a little bit slow motion for the fall. Do you use a mathematical formula, or do you kind of go by the seat of your pants?
No, there is I don't know, there's a bullshit formula to do that. Basically, you just got to have done a lot to know what is the, you know, gut feeling for this stuff. And one of the biggest giveaways in the past with miniature works is they've actually overshot the slow motion, so things are just a little bit too slow. And I wanted this to look as realistic as possible, so we were just shooting just above normal speed, just to give things mass and weight. I have to say something I learned on Batman Begins. You know, there's a great deal of work with the Batmobile in that's miniature, and nobody notices it because it's behaving at what appears to be the same rate as the full-scale object. So I applied the same kind of thinking to the collapsing house.
So today, where I think most filmmakers who aren't as experienced with the old school techniques will very often go like, oh, let's do this digitally. And we'll sort of run off in that direction or whatever. Talk about, for both of you, where you think the world of practical miniatures, how it plays in filmmaking today, and why it's so important to keep this art form and this technique alive.
You go first, Chris.
The problem I feel with digital is that it's a bit soulless. It's like a drum machine where it's technically perfect, but it doesn't have any soul to it. It's not the same as a real drummer. It's far better, I think, to have a miniature that's shot in the real world that happens to be in front of a camera, and a camera is recording it, because it's this thing about the brain doesn't know why something doesn't quite look real, but it knows that it's not real. When it's a miniature, even though it might be small, it still obviously exists in the real world. One of the examples I like to think of is if you took a film like The Battle of Britain, or even Jaws or Alien, nowadays they would be done digitally, but they wouldn't necessarily be as impressive, because I think the audience psychology is actually more complicated. You can go to a film and be aware of the fact that it's a film, but at the same time you can be impressed that they've put 60 or 70 rare vintage warbird aircraft into the sky and recreated the Battle of Britain and filmed it, rather than knowing it's all digital. And stunts, for example, the Bond movies are well known for the fact that, generally speaking, the stunts are done for real. There might be a safety wire on an actor that's been digitally removed, but the fact is that somebody has still jumped off the top of a dam or out of a plane, and you can see that it's real, and there's a sense of hazard. When it's a digital character and you can see it's a digital character, there's no sense of hazard. And I think the audience feels shortchanged. They feel like that the filmmakers haven't gone to the bother of doing something to impress you. And I think film, it's more than just about the story. It is spectacle, it is theatre, but it's theatre that has been filmed by a film camera. It's been done for real and a film camera has filmed it. So I think it's very, very important to try and keep what's on the screen look real, even if it isn't, but make it look like it actually happened. And I think a lot of films today don't necessarily do that. I mentioned something like Jaws. This is something else I feel happens with modern films. If they remade Jaws today, somebody somewhere would say, we're not just going to have the shark jump on the back of the boat, it's going to jump over the boat doing a somersault. And it's like, no, don't do it. Keep it real. And I think that's the problem. I think because digital allows you to do a lot of things, people do it. They shouldn't do it, but they do it. And they think it's better. And I think it isn't. I think sometimes less is more. And keeping it real using miniatures is a good way of keeping it real.
Yeah, Steve?
I agree with that, all of that. I really do. I think one of the big issues I have with modern filmmaking with CGI is camera moves. One of the things I loved about Casino Royale and the other couple of Bond films I did afterwards is that we didn't do any stupid kind of big swooping shots that a camera could never really do in a helicopter or even a drone. So everything kind of had a air of reality about it. And even when we were asked to do full CG stuff, there was nothing that I remember that looked completely kind of hokey and misbehaved and looked lightweight or moved too fast or whatever. So I feel that forever you've got to somehow acknowledge the real laws of physics. And a lot of CGI stuff now, I'm afraid, looks like the animators and sometimes the supervisors, the people in charge of that, get all their reference points from games. They don't actually look at real stuff. So everything moves too fast now and what have you. So I'm not a fan of full CGI action sequences in particular. And I think there's a few film series that overdo it, and you know, and in my experience, the Bond movies never did that. We've always kind of held back a little bit, and everything was like reality based. And I think, as Chris was saying, the audience kind of felt, well, that didn't look really insane, that move. You know, it didn't fly into a window and a bit of debris come right at the camera perfectly sort of timed. So you start to think, was that real? That felt real. That was almost ugly sometimes. And I feel that there's that restraint was used a lot in the Bond films I worked on, and it made the stuff generally feel more realistic, unless we missed something.
Yeah, I one of the things that really, when I look at the success of like the Marvel movie universe, which is just staggering amounts of success beyond comprehension on that, and they've really clearly linked into an audience. But when you talk about physics, and I mean these films are like hybrid animated live action films, and when Spider-Man swings, I've watched trapeze artists. They swing in a very particular way. There's this lag time when they're moving from like one bar to one swing to another and stuff. And the Spider-Man movies, they don't capture that, but they still work for an audience, and they still have they're creating whatever reality they are. They can have one of my favorites is Green Goblin at one point is like holding a cable for the Roosevelt Island tramway in New York City, and then he's holding a person, and it's like, I don't care what super suit you have on, you're being pulled off that pylon you're standing on by the weight of that tramway. Physics is not going to be kind to whatever super suit you're wearing.
But if you saw Bond do that, you go, forget it. No, wrong. That's the thing about Bond, is that there's like a reality filter. Even though it's borderline incredible, it's still reality based. So, certainly the films I worked on and the ones before that inspired me when I was a kid, there was very few stupid moments like that, bar one. Involving an ice wave, that one.
That wasn't when you were a kid. You were a functioning professional at that point. So
I was functioning, yes.
Well, I don't think it was. I think one of the real problems with that was, as you talk about, the swooping camera move, the going into the close up on the digital version of Pierce Brosnan's, or digitally wrapped version of Pierce Brosnan's face. But they had opened the film with a surfing scene.
Yeah, which looked great.
The greatest surfer you can get.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna just like, oh, we're gonna shoot some daylight stuff of this, and we're gonna CGI in some pieces of ice around him, because Hamilton can surf the freaking biggest waves out there on that. And then you go from that at the beginning, which is done the way it's done, and then you put in a completely digital tsunami wave, and it's like, well,
that's a creative decision, though. That usually comes from the director, and in my experience, Martin Campbell was completely reality based, and to a degree, obviously, Sam Mendes. And the moment you broke that envelope, looks. Martin's reference was looks cheesy, looks cartoony, looks crap. And they pulled the reins back on it, and quite rightly, I think. And they got a real world based Bond environment. In fact, in one of the later films, Spectre, we had a base blowing up, and at one point we were going to have it all blow up. It kind of go up and then implode and then blow up. And I remember Sam saying, "Yeah, sounds Marvel film to me. I'm not going to go that way," even though he kind of pushed it that way initially, and then he just felt this is not right for a James Bond film. So we backed off.
Yeah.
But going back to Casino Royale. Casino Royale, more than any, just felt like it was a thriller with spectacular events, rather than a cartoon thing with live action put into it. So
yeah, and it's certainly, I mean, just the little details that digital does add, making sure that you're going to shoot a truck crash, but you're not going to put the stuntmen doing what used to happen, running out of the way right before the crash. But now you can have them in the same frame with the crash a little bit closer, and it's moving so fast you don't even think these aren't real stunt players who are digitally out there running. And you probably don't have to pay them as much of a stunt adjustment either, because there's not going to be metal. That kind of attention to detail that you would see in there, that creates that verisimilitude, is something that I think lifts Casino Royale up, and it created this new generation of Bond films that audience have really linked into this Daniel Craig iteration of the character. And I think it takes everybody's attention to detail, from the smallest details of the miniatures to the largest details of exactly making sure that character looks glamorous in every shot, that he's got the right look, even if that means you have to adjust his collar or cuffs digitally to make that, to give it that feel there. And I just want to congratulate both of you guys on the outstanding work for the film series, and particularly for Casino Royale. And thank you so much for taking us through in such wonderful detail this. I'm hoping that we're able to close with a little video that, Steve, that you have together that shows some of the highlights being put together in a really exciting way.
Go for it. Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Great. All right. Once again, on behalf of SpyCon, and particularly to fundraise for the Motion Picture and Television Fund, please contribute. Thanks so much. Take care, guys, okay?